They were the most feared fighting force in history, an army of iron discipline that conquered the known world. We see them in our minds as perfect stoic warriors, loyal only to the eagle of their legion. But what really happened behind the walls of their forts, on campaigns that lasted for years in hostile lands? What happened when the battle was over and the darkness fell? For centuries, we've been told a simplified story. A story of soldiers who completely suppressed their desires in the name of military glory. But recent discoveries, private letters from distant frontiers, hidden graffiti on barrack walls, and forgotten legal wills reveal a truth far more complex, human, and shocking than you could ever imagine. Today, we are exposing the secret sex lives of Roman soldiers, and I promise you, by the end of this journey, you will never look at a Roman legionary the same way again. This is the history you were never taught in school. To make sure you don't miss our weekly explorations into the hidden corners of the ancient world, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. The story the Romans didn't want you to know begins now. To understand the world of the Roman soldier, we must first forget our own moral codes. For the Romans, the honor or shame of a sexual act was not about gender. It was about power and social status. A Roman citizen could have sex with another man, a slave, or a prostitute without any damage to his reputation, as long as he took the active, dominant role. To be penetrated was considered degrading for a free-born man, a sign of weakness that made him seem feminine, stripping him of his virtues, his manly courage. This entire worldview was amplified tenfold within the rigid hierarchy of the military. A veteran centurion in a relationship with a young, lower-ranking soldier wasn't judged because the power dynamic was clear and socially acceptable. This code, this obsession with dominance, created a complex social landscape where intimacy could flourish, as long as it followed the unwritten rules of power. The most common and socially accepted form of relationship was what historians now call erotic mentorship. This was an intense bond between an experienced veteran and a young recruit, a relationship that seamlessly blended military training, fatherly protection, and sexual intimacy. Imagine being a 17-year-old farm boy, torn from your home in Hispania or Gaul, and thrown into the brutal, unforgiving world of a Roman legion. A veteran mentor, a man in his 30s with a decade of service, was your lifeline. He would teach you the unwritten rules of the legion, protect you from the relentless hazing of other soldiers, and provide the critical emotional support needed to survive the psychological toll of ancient warfare. In this environment of constant physical proximity and mutual dependence, sharing a tent barely large enough for two, huddling together for warmth on the freezing German frontier, bathing together in makeshift baths, and fighting back-to-back in the bloody chaos of battle, a physical relationship was not only understandable, it was almost inevitable. These bonds followed strict, unwritten rules. The veteran always maintained the active, dominant role befitting his status and experience. The recruit, in turn, accepted a temporary passive role with the explicit understanding that this dynamic would shift as he gained rank and experience himself. Far from being seen as a weakness, the Roman command viewed this as a strength. These relationships forged an unbreakable loyalty that made the entire unit fight harder. The bond was not just tolerated, it was often encouraged. It was an integral part of how new soldiers were fully integrated into the legionary culture. These relationships had specific durations, typically lasting 2 to 4 years, coinciding with the cycles of training and promotion. Once the recruit became a seasoned soldier, the sexual aspect of the relationship would naturally conclude, but the emotional bond and fierce loyalty remained for the rest of their military careers. A soldier would die for Rome, but he would die even more heroically for the man he loved. How do we know all of this? Because these soldiers left behind a trail of evidence, hidden in plain sight. Private letters written on wooden tablets and preserved for nearly 2,000 years in the anaerobic soil of forts like Vindolanda in Britain reveal an emotional world of stunning depth. One of the most moving letters was discovered in Germany, written by a Gallic soldier named Lucius Eternius to his sweet Marcellus, another soldier who had been transferred to a different fort. In the letter, Eternius writes with poetic intimacy of the loneliness he feels, using metaphors to express his physical desire and referencing shared sexual encounters that were clearly part of a deep and lasting love affair. This wasn't just barracks talk. This was love and longing etched into wood. The most powerful proof of these bonds, however, comes from the soldiers' last wills and testaments. Before embarking on a dangerous campaign, legionaries would draft these legal documents. Time and again, they reveal emotional and economic ties that can only be explained by profound, intimate relationships. Consider the will of Titus Flavius Virilis, a centurion who died during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. He bequeathed the majority of his life savings and personal possessions not to family, but to my dearest Marcus Antonius Priscus, who has been my most faithful companion in war and my greatest comfort in peace. The language transcends mere friendship. It speaks of a lifetime partnership. Even in death, their bond was made permanent. When a soldier died, it was common for a specific comrade to take on the duty of arranging the funeral and maintaining the tomb. The inscriptions on these tombstones are often heartbreakingly explicit. One discovered near Caerleon in Wales, paid for by a soldier named Sextus Valerius, honors his sweet companion, Lucius Ductius, with verses expressing a grief so personal it can only be for a lost lover. The tomb also contained intimate shared objects, identical rings, a two-handled wine cup, and a small statuette of Venus they had apparently bought together. These men lived, fought, loved, and chose to be buried together for eternity. But what about relationships between soldiers of the same rank? Without the protective structure of mentorship, this is where things got complicated and dangerous. When two equals had a relationship, the Roman code of honor faced a crisis. Who would take the shameful passive role? This could lead to social ruin, accusations of effeminacy, and a loss of status. To navigate this social minefield, soldiers developed sophisticated strategies. The most common was the alternation of roles, a practice that required immense trust and communication, thereby strengthening their emotional bond while preserving the dignity of both men. Another strategy was what we might call rituals of compensatory masculinity. After a sexual encounter where a soldier had taken a passive role, he might engage in activities that publicly reaffirmed his warrior status. Hyper-aggressive sparring duels, feats of strength, or acts of incredible bravery in the next battle. It was a way of proving to the unit that his fighting ability remained undiminished. The graffiti they left behind proves how common these relationships were. On the walls of forts from Hadrian's Wall to the Euphrates, archaeologists have found explicit declarations of love, erotic poems celebrating the physical beauty of a specific comrade, and boasts of sexual conquest. One incredible inscription from a bathhouse in Pannonia reads, "Here, under the eagles of Rome, Gaius found in Marcus not just a brother in arms, but the fire that turns iron into gold and fear into courage." This suggests these relationships weren't just tolerated, they were seen as an integral part of what made these men extraordinary warriors. We are peeling back the layers of one of history's greatest myths. If you're finding this exploration of the real humanity behind the Roman war machine as fascinating as I do, hit that like button right now. It tells our channel you want more deep dives into the authentic stories of the past. But we must not romanticize this world. Not all sexual relationships in the legions were consensual. The same rigid hierarchy that structured mentorship also created a dark potential for abuse. High-ranking officers sometimes used their authority to force themselves upon subordinates, especially young, vulnerable recruits. Roman military law was surprisingly explicit about this problem. The Lex Julia, passed under Augustus, decreed death or exile for any officer who used his position to sexually coerce a soldier under his command. However, enforcing these laws was difficult and depended entirely on the will of senior commanders. But where official justice failed, the soldiers often delivered their own. Testimonies suggest that veterans formed informal protective networks around new recruits to shield them from predatory officers. And in extreme cases, there is evidence that abusive officers would sometimes meet with accidents during the chaos of battle, eliminated discreetly by their own men. The army also punished what it considered degrading sexual behavior. The most common punishment was the fustigatio, a public flogging that could include up to 200 lashes, followed by demotion and a reduction in pay. In serious cases, a soldier could be dishonorably discharged, effectively a social death sentence. But it is crucial to understand what was being punished. A soldier in a consensual, hierarchical relationship would never be punished. The penalties were reserved for behaviors that violated the code of honor, prostituting one's body for money, or voluntarily and permanently adopting a submissive sexual role, which was seen as a betrayal of a soldier's masculine identity. Roman commanders were, above all, pragmatists. They knew that an army of 5,000 men, on campaign for years in hostile territory, had powerful human needs. Suppressing sexuality completely was not only impossible, it was dangerous to morale and unit cohesion. So they found intelligent ways to manage it. During long sieges, like the 4-year siege of Jerusalem, General Vespasian implemented a rotating leave system, allowing groups of soldiers to visit female prostitutes in nearby Allied cities. Other commanders organized religious festivals dedicated to Mars, the god of war. These festivals included ritualized sexual activities, both heterosexual with priestesses and homosexual between soldiers, which were considered legitimate forms of religious worship for warriors. These ceremonies were particularly important for couples who had formed on campaign, as they provided official recognition and divine blessing for their bond. Two soldiers who had fought and loved together could participate in special rituals that consecrated their relationship as a sacred brotherhood, blessed by the gods of war. On campaigns in territories where no women were available, some commanders even developed official policies that explicitly tolerated homosexual relationships as long as they followed the proper rules of hierarchy and honor. It was a pragmatic acknowledgement that repressing the army's sexuality was far more dangerous than managing it. The psychological effects of these relationships on the battlefield were profound and complex. On one hand, the intimate emotional bonds created an extraordinary motivation to protect one another. A soldier in love would fight with a ferocity impossible to achieve through discipline alone. During the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where 3 entire legions were annihilated, surviving testimonies describe soldiers fighting to the last man to defend their wounded comrades with an intensity that speaks to a bond far deeper than mere camaraderie. But this emotional depth was also a vulnerability. Cunning enemy commanders who understood these bonds would sometimes develop tactics specifically designed to separate warrior pairs, knowing it would cause a psychological trauma that could weaken the entire unit. The death of a lover in combat could trigger psychological reactions so severe that even a seasoned soldier could become useless, either obsessed with suicidal revenge or so depressed that he lost the will to fight. Roman commanders developed specific protocols to handle this, including special funeral rites to help soldiers process their grief and temporary reassignments to prevent them from being overwhelmed by their emotional pain. The Roman army was not a monolith. It was a multi-ethnic force. The integration of the auxilia, non-Roman troops from across the empire, made the sexual dynamics even more complex. These troops included Germans, Gauls, Hispania, and Thracians, each with their own unique sexual traditions and codes of masculine honor. Some of these cultures, particularly the Germanic and Celtic tribes, had warrior traditions that included ceremonial homosexual bonds as an integral part of their military identity. When these soldiers were integrated into mixed units with Roman legionaries, a complex cultural fusion occurred. The most successful Roman commanders were those who understood and respected these different traditions. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, during his campaigns in Germania, implemented a system where different auxiliary units could maintain their own traditions, as long as it didn't compromise overall military effectiveness. This cultural flexibility even led to Roman legionaries adopting foreign traditions. In units that served alongside Germanic auxiliaries for long periods, it was common for Romans to adopt warrior brotherhood rituals that included traditionally Germanic sexual elements, creating hybrid military cultures that combined the strengths of multiple martial traditions. What happened when a soldier's 25-year service was over? For couples who had shared decades of intimacy, the transition to civilian life was a crisis. Some resolved it by settling together in the same veteran colonies, presenting themselves as business partners or adopted brothers to a civilian world that might not understand. Records from colonies like Emerita Augusta in Spain are filled with deeds for properties co-owned by pairs of veterans who were clearly lifelong partners. Others married local women and started traditional families, but maintained intimate contact with their former comrades through veteran associations. These clubs provided a socially acceptable cover for continuing relationships. Their annual banquets often included recreations of military rituals that had sexual elements, allowing established civilian men to express a part of their identity that their new social roles did not permit. The temples in these colonies, dedicated to military gods, contained countless votive inscriptions paid for jointly by pairs of veterans, using language that clearly refers to a relationship far more intimate than simple friendship. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Roman military sexuality was how these men reconciled what seemed to us like contradictory identities. By day, they were disciplined killing machines. By night, in the privacy of their tents, they could become tender lovers, capable of profound emotional vulnerability. This was not a contradiction to the Romans. It was proof of the complexity of a true warrior. A soldier who could love deeply could also hate fiercely. A man who knew intimate tenderness also understood necessary brutality. Roman military philosophy held that the best warriors were those who had experienced the full range of human emotions, including romantic love and sexual passion. The military theorist Vegetius argued that soldiers who have known true love fight with greater ferocity because they have something genuinely valuable to protect. The Romans intuitively understood a psychological principle that modern science has confirmed. Deep emotional bonds create motivations for self-sacrifice that cannot be achieved through discipline or patriotism alone. A soldier will fight to the death for his empire, but he will die in even more heroic ways for the man he loves. The legacy of these traditions extended far beyond the fall of the empire, influencing European military cultures for centuries. From the knightly orders of the Middle Ages to the epic poems of warrior brotherhoods, the idea that intimate bonds between fighters are a source of strength, not weakness, is a direct inheritance from Rome. If this deep exploration into one of the most misunderstood aspects of military history has captivated you, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about these revealing aspects of Roman humanity? Thank you for joining me on this exploration of one of the most human and intimate aspects of the civilization that laid the foundations of the Western world. Until next week, and may you enjoy discovering the infinite mysteries of the human experience through history.